All right, hi everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Curious K podcast. My name is Kolapo and I'm your host. This episode features Ajay Ramasubramaniam, founder and CEO of Startup Réseau. So I'll just talk briefly about Startup Réseau. Uh, it's a company that is built on the founding pillar of startups first. It operates startup accelerator program with a vision to be the ultimate network of enterprises, capital market, and services for startups. And interestingly, AJ is also part of Hindsight Ventures, which is a spin-off, and it's an African-focused startup accelerator, and it's operating programs with reputable partners such as AB InBev, Absa Bank, Dot Tanzania, and has established partnerships with over 20 enablers across the continent for joint programming. AJ, it's an honor to have you on Curious K podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Kolapo, thank you so much for having me as a guest on the Curious Key podcast. Looking forward to this chat and adding some value to the listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. And how are you doing today? I know you've been traveling of late. How has it been like?
Doing well, sitting in bright and sunny Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt. So, been around in Nairobi for a few weeks prior to this and heading back there after this. But yeah, doing all good.
Good. All right. So let us get into it, AJ. Can you just tell us about how you were able to get into innovation space? What was the path for you? How did you get to a point where you were working with startups and it was just very exciting for you to be supporting the ecosystem?
Good question. If I knew an answer as to when I got into this, that would be a good story to tell. But jokes aside, I've been doing this for about a decade now, and my
Amazing.
first tryst with this entire startup and innovation ecosystem began probably around 2010 when I used to still back then work with the provincial government of Ontario, Canada. I used to be doing foreign direct investments and trade for Ontario with India and ended up working on an innovation delegation that we led from India to Toronto. And that was my first kind of real interaction with the extended startup ecosystem, as we know, whether it is investors, incubators, and accelerators, which was still around back then. And yeah, that was my first contact point with the whole entrepreneurship ecosystem. Then I ended up working for a Canadian university, Ryerson University in Toronto. I spent about 6 years working for them, setting up an accelerator and early stage venture fund in India. Ran it as its CEO, expanded it to Vietnam. So that kind of really gave me a lot of depth into the whole world of startups and startup ecosystem. And those were kind of the founding seeds, if I may call them, of Startup Réseau, which is now almost 3 years old.
And I checked out, I think I was watching one of your videos on YouTube and I got to know that restaurant is actually a French word. Am I right? And it
Absolutely.
means networking,
Correct.
right?
Network,
And
yeah.
and that's the concept because it's a platform, like you said, the founding pillar is startup first.
Hmm.
And so, what was the story like? So, founding, having experience in Canada, running accelerator incubation programs. Then, at what point did you go back to India and be like, okay, this is time for me to go back home, build stuff? What was that transition like for you?
Sure. So, Kalapa, I'll just kind of briefly correct you on that one. So, when I was working for Ryerson University, it was still, I was the country director CEO for India. So, I set up an accelerator in India. It was the first kind of international startup accelerator which opened up shop in the country in Mumbai, in India. So, I was very much based in India when I was running the accelerator.
All right, all right. So tell us about Startup Rescue in India. Tell us about some of the programs you've done, some of the most exciting things you worked on, and I also know Inside Venture is a spin-off. All
Mhm.
right, so
Mhm.
it will also be nice for you to just connect that for us.
Absolutely. So when I moved out of my role at Zone Startups, which was the Canadian entity which I was operating in India, I pretty much believed that just like the Techstars and the plug and plays of the world have extensive operations in North America, in Europe, and other parts of the world, I felt that there was a need and opportunity to cater to startups in emerging economies in the global South. So starting from South and Southeast Asia, getting on to Middle East, Africa, South America, and so on. So when Startup Réseau opened shop in August 2019, the goal and the vision and mission were always to cater to entrepreneurs in emerging economies. It just so happened that we started off with India because that's where we were headquartered. And like you were mentioning in your brief of who we are and what we do. So everything that we do is exciting. I mean, when you're working with startups and innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, every day is a new day, and every day is having its own set of excitement when you meet with entrepreneurs and engage with founders and startups. So not complaining on that one anytime soon. But in terms of the kind of work we do, Rezo means network, and the network on which our business is built: enterprise, capital, markets, and services. Each one of them is a strong pillar of sorts. Each one of them is a revenue book. So we are bootstrapped as a company. We generate our own revenues by running programs and things like that. And enterprise is the largest contributor. We work with large
Mm.
companies which are typically Fortune 500 multinationals, for whom we kind of come in as an extended innovation arm, setting up their accelerator, innovation lab, whatever one calls it, and actually operationalizing it for them. So in that way, we kind of are sustainable. We generate our own revenues. Likewise, we work with governments for whom we operate inbound and outbound soft landing programs, enabling companies expand into new horizons, new geographies. Under advisory and services, we operate our own brand of bootcamps and accelerators, focusing on women entrepreneurs, youth, uh, themes like fintech and AI. So it's kind of an ecosystem in itself, and that's why the name also, when we were thinking about it, the network or the ecosystem we bring together kind of prompted the name Startup Reserve, which is half English and half French, because startups at all points requires the four elements which constitute or are part of Startup Reserve: enterprise, capital, markets, and services. Coming to Hindsight Ventures, which is our Africa focused business. So, like I said, we always wanted to be or see ourselves as an international operator, and there is a huge need gap to be fulfilled across emerging economies. As we were prospecting different markets, we started off with Southeast Asia, looked at Middle East, and we ended up on Africa as a market. And sorry. And when we launched Africa, it still was startup Rezo, but very
Okay.
quickly, a month or two into it, we realized that seeing how emerging technology hubs and ecosystems in Africa are pretty much circa 2014, 2015 Indian startup ecosystem. Whether you look at the overall population, I know that it's wrong to compare a country and a continent, India, Africa, but 1.3 billion people, an extremely high percentage of youth population, the overall internet and smartphone penetration, the net new number of new internet users expected to come online in the next 3 to 5 years. And also, I mean, Africa is one landmass, but divided into 54, 55 countries. Similarly, India, even though it's a country, if you look at the number of states and union territories that we have, it's one country, but again, it's kind of fairly broken when it comes to replicating into new regions and states. So, keeping all of this in mind, we realized that, hey, you know what? More than anything else, what we can bring to the table beyond the mentorship and validation is that seeing how the Indian startup ecosystem has matured over the last 6 or 7 years, I think there's a fair amount of value that we can bring in terms of learnings and experiences, which can be shared with founders in Africa, so that they either don't commit mistakes or they commit better mistakes, because there is something to look at. And also, given the historic relations between India and several countries in Africa, I think a lot of African nations still relate more to India compared to Western economies. Whether you look at agriculture, if you look at education, healthcare, access to finance, energy, and areas like that. So that's what got us to rebrand ourselves as Hindsight Ventures when it comes to Africa as a business. And Africa is the only region or the only continent or the only place in the world where we go by a different name than Startup Rezo. Everywhere else we are Startup Rezo, but very strategically we have positioned ourselves as Hindsight Ventures when it comes to Africa. So that's a little bit of backstory on us and Hindsight Ventures.
Amazing. That sounds really good. So, I mean, you try to talk about like some similarities between the African continent and India. And I also know, like, I mean, there are a lot of unicorns, all right, startup unicorns in India, maybe almost 100 now, if not over 100. Can you just talk briefly about that ecosystem? I know the government in India probably, there must have been some policies, that will enable, startups to grow, that will attract funding into the ecosystem. Can you just talk about some of, like, the key policies or actions that you think has been done by the government, that you think has improved or helped the startup system grow? Because I believe a lot of African countries can learn a lot from India already. A lot of similarities, a lot of things we can do together. So what are some of those things that you think are key, that has enabled the startup ecosystem, in India to spin out close to over 100 unicorns? And what are the key things you think other African or emerging startup ecosystem can learn from that?
Sure, no, and that's a great point you bring out. And if you look at the unicorns that India has spun out, it's not a 2 year or a 4 year story, because a lot of these companies have been built over a long time. Many of them have been built over the value that they deliver to their customers, but many of them, as you would know, have been built purely on the VC money pumped in, and the valuations kind of going through the roof. Having said that, the startup story in India is not as young as it seems, right? Even if you go down to late 90s and early 2000s, there were a good number of consumer internet startups which kind of mushroomed. But as everywhere else, the the big what do you call it? There was a boom and a bust of the dot-com industry in the late 90s and early 2000s, and there were a few which survived, but there were many founders who had kind of burned their hands bad, but they went on their next venture fairly silently, and there was a short lull in some ways for about 7 or 8 years, until say 2007 or 2008, when the next wave of internet entrepreneurs in India kind of came up. Still, if you look at the early 2010s, there were good companies being kind of built out of India. Many of them catering to India, many of them catering to global markets when it came to enterprise software and B2B technology and so on and so forth. It was probably in 2016 when our Honorable Prime Minister introduced or launched the Startup India program. Because when the head of the state talks of startups and about how India can be a net job creator rather than a job seeker, I think a lot of people culturally started believing that being an entrepreneur or starting a venture and even failing is a risk worth taking.
Hmm.
Because as much as one would like to believe that everyone going to good engineering schools or business schools in India wants to be an entrepreneur, that probably is not the case. People want to work for startups, because a lot of startups that were flushed with VC money, they want to pay you higher than market rates, which kind of is attractive for any young person who is graduating. Because if traditional industry pays you X and someone is paying you 2X, absolutely you would want to go for 2X. So a lot of people want to work for startups for that reason. And for many of them, the culture of working in startups is about wearing shorts and flip-flops, and everyone thinks that that's how Silicon Valley works. They don't know that Silicon Valley, there are a lot of people who work their backside off and burn midnight oil to ensure that the company succeeds. So a lot of young people have misconceptions around it's cool and fancy to work in a startup. You can have beer at work. You can probably play snooker or billiards, and a lot of those kind of things. But when Startup India was launched as an initiative of the government of India, I think a lot of people started believing that at the end of the day, doing startup is not a bad deal after all.
Oh.
The other thing is, government can play a very strong role of facilitator or enabler, but government cannot really disburse money to the end benefactors, and that's why you need to kind of look at it as a real collaboration of private and public sector, whether it is industry, whether it is academia, all of them coming together, which actually helps in building out a local startup ecosystem. So government nowhere has a magic wand where it taps on something and a startup kind of emerges and it kind of becomes successful. So it is fairly kind of tedious. It requires coordination of different artists for the music to kind of really sound soothing to the ear. So you need different stakeholders to come together, and that's where probably people who have successfully built companies, who have had exits, who have raised multiple rounds of funding, They need to be talking about their journey, because everything is not rosy. You need to kind of involve and engage incubators and accelerators, because they are the ones who are kind of giving the playground for young companies to actually kind of do the early days. You got to kind of bring in academic institutions, because that is where talent is going to come in. You got to bring in industry, because that's where the demand is going to be, investors. Other it is based on industry or sector, or people who kind of enable entrepreneurship through events and conference and so on, and eventually the government. So the government is an important stakeholder, but apart from the government, there are at least another 5 or 6 stakeholder groups who need to be kind of brought in to actually create a vibrant and strong local startup ecosystem. So all of this kind of started happening post 2016, and that's when we have. So if you go back to actually 2016, India, in terms of total number of startups and total venture capital and private equity money pumped into startups, stood at number 21 and number 26 globally at that point. In less than 5 years, India stands at number 3, or ranks number 3, both in terms of number of startups in the country, as well as total VC and PE money kind of pumped into startups in the country. So that's a fairly kind of big jump in a relatively short 5-year span.
Amazing. I think so. The startup program by the government was like a key eye opener in terms of, uh, growing that ecosystem. Because once the government, and you said there was a combination of the government and the private sector as well, there was a jump in terms of the understanding, of what it means to build startups across the country, which I think it's really amazing. I mean, irrespective of what the private sector is doing, I mean, you cannot take out the importance of, of government supporting in building an ecosystem.
And I think it's more of a cultural shift or a change in mindset. That's what has come
Okay.
in.
So a change in mindset is also critical for the people that will be building the product.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, to have an entrepreneurial mindset and to kind of think that failure is acceptable, I think is a big thing, which allows you to take risks, and building startups or doing startups is all about having the courage to take risks, but also empathy to solve for someone else. So I think that's a major change which has kind of come by.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, because I mean, in some states in Nigeria, for example, some people used to say it's a civil service state, which means that most of the people, or the majority of employment in that state, or formal employment in that state, they are
Mm.
generated by the government. So there are a lot of civil servants in that space, except for people working in
Yeah.
the informal sector. All right. So people that are educated, that have gone to school and
Hmm.
they want to get a job. I mean, being a civil servant just like kind of makes sense, because that is the culture that has been passed down from their parents. All right. So I really understand the importance of that mind shift for people to understand that. I mean, failure is not the end of the world. Uh, being an entrepreneur, failure is actually part of the journey. I think that's really an
Yeah.
amazing concept. Yeah.
No,
So tell
absolutely,
us.
I agree with you.
Yeah, so tell us about Insight Ventures, some of like the programs that you're currently doing in Africa. Uh, I know part of your partner is Dot Tanzania. You have Absa Bank, I think that's in South Africa. So can you tell us some of like the programs? Do you provide funding for startups, or they are just corporate innovation program? How does that? I mean, can you break it down for us?
Sure. Thank you, Kalapo, for asking me that question, because Africa is very close to my heart in many ways. I actually began my career in Tanzania, going back to 2004. So my first 4 years of professional work experience and career began in Africa. And
Amazing.
I always wanted to kind of come back. I left the continent, left Tanzania as a country in 2008. And even back then, I knew that at some point in time, I wanted to come back to Africa. I never knew the twists and turns life would take, and I would be an entrepreneur and enabling entrepreneurship, and that is what would bring me back to Africa. But it's kind of really exciting to be in these parts, or be in Africa at these times, because we can always talk of Vision 2040, Vision 2062, and whatnot, but to actually be able to see results and outcomes at that point in time in the future, unless and until you're working towards it today, you're not going to be able to see results then. And with 1.3 billion people in the continent, with average median age anywhere between 17 and 20 across most countries, more than 10 mega cities expected in the continent over the next 10 to 15 years, the kind of internet penetration, I think Africa is massive. I mean, in terms of opportunity. When it comes to Hindsight Ventures, I explained why the name Hindsight Ventures earlier in the conversation. And what have we done so far? So we haven't started investing yet. The ultimate goal is to start making early stage pre-seed kind of investments in companies that go through our programs. We use our programs as a methodology of working due diligence, because we believe that as much as funding is important to startups, I think startups need to be supported in more than one ways in terms of building a business. The challenge with many countries that we have seen in Africa and many ecosystems that we've been a part of is that even if you look at enablers, yes, there are people having the good heart and the good intent, but if you actually haven't built companies and scaled companies and haven't seen that happening around you, it is highly unlikely that you'll be able to pass on learnings to early stage companies that get into your programs. And the reason I say this is purely out of experience, because if you typically look at incubators and accelerators, usually the person running the incubator or accelerator, how well connected he or she is, how well aware he or she is, eventually becomes the personality of the incubator accelerator, and vice versa. So unless and until you have people who kind of really have been around startups and done things, it's going to be difficult to add value to startups at an early stage. Now, the two things that we pride ourselves upon is, one is the enterprise connect that we bring to the table, and the second one is global market access. And when we have these two things, we're able to cover a lot of grounds when it comes to working with startups, whether it is getting them connected to potential customers and partners, it's getting them connected to mentors who are either entrepreneurs or investors in tech companies, and they've kind of been doing it for a while. So these kind of things kind of really add value to founders who are building companies for the longer run. And also, by the time they are ready to kind of raise any kind of venture money, they have revenues, they have good partnerships in place, which allows them to either ask for more or probably get a better deal on the negotiation table, rather than kind of diluting a high percentage of equity for small amounts of money. So currently, the big focus has been on running those pre-accelerators and boot camps, and we have done 8 of those so far. And one green funnel program, which is our flagship Hindsight Ventures accelerator, which keeps accepting applications throughout the year. And every month we onboard anywhere between 8 to 12 companies, and we kind of keep adding them up every month. That is a flagship program. But apart from that, we have a flagship program by the name Wazo Challenge. Wazo meaning idea in Swahili. We started out with Wazo Challenge Tanzania, we then did Wazo Challenge East Africa, and currently we are in Nairobi, Kenya, doing the third edition of Wazo Challenge as a country-specific edition focusing on Kenya. With Wazo Challenge, what we aspire to do is that every year we would like to operate 2 editions, one being a country edition and one being a regional edition. In all likelihood, we are going to be in Lagos later this year, and if things going well with our partner, we'll be happy to announce either a Wazo Challenge or something equivalent in terms of name, but very focused on Nigeria as a market, because a lot of startups from Nigeria keep applying to a whole bunch of our programs, and unfortunately, we are unable to accommodate many of them. But that's as far as Wazo Challenge goes. Apart from this, we have worked with DOT in running Founder Development Bootcamp. We also worked with them in running a women entrepreneur leadership development program, which was also funded by the High Commission of Canada to Tanzania. But apart from that, we have worked with few corporates in establishing and operating corporate accelerators and innovation programs. Like you rightly mentioned, APSA, they have been a partner to us in Tanzania, in Kenya. We have worked with AB InBev in running a Pan-Africa business accelerator. And also last year, we launched something called as the East Africa Corporate Innovation Summit, which is basically a platform run over 2 days to bring in startups and corporates under one roof, to engage and ensure that there is deeper conversations and dialogue between corporates and startups. Because for the success of startups and for the ecosystem to kind of mature, I think corporates and private sector have a huge role to play, not just by leveraging their CSR or corporate stewardship, but also adopting technologies, working with founders and providing them with mentorship, uh, making some small purchases to begin with from startups who still have to make it big. Because unless and until you support them, it's going to be difficult and uphill for a lot of companies to actually make the cut. So yeah, that's about the kind of programming that we've been doing, and what Hindsight Ventures stands for.
All right, really interesting, and I'm happy that you also mentioned Lagos. Because
Mhm.
when you're talking about Kenya, Nairobi, I was just being patient that okay, is AJ is not going to come to Nigeria? Is that what you're telling me? But I'm happy you finally mentioned your plans, for Lagos, and that you have a lot of startups in Nigeria that are always applying to your program. And based on what you said, most of your program are organized. In partnership with corporate organization? Is that strictly your model, or you have programs, boot camps, the accelerator program that are just like an independent program, where maybe you bring investors or you connect the startups to investors? So your program in Nigeria or that is coming to Lagos, for example, what is the model for that? Is this just your typical accelerator program, or you're looking to partner with some corporate to run those, the startup programs you have in plan?
So if you look at most of our programs, they're either programs that we run for corporates or programs that are backed and supported, sponsored by corporates. For one, we believe that unless and until you are writing a check to a startup, doesn't matter if it's a 5,000 check or a $500,000 check, unless and until you're writing a check, you shouldn't be taking equity from startups.
Hmm.
That's a fundamental belief that we have, that for services like advisory, mentorship, you shouldn't be taking equity in startup. The second thing is, if startup is pre-revenue and they are going to be requiring your help to scale, I also don't believe, and we as a company also don't believe, that we should be taking a fee for service
Hmm.
from
I,
startups.
I, I share that.
So
I
we
share
pretty much,
that. I share that with you. I share that thought
yeah.
as
So
well.
we're pretty much we kind of run our business as a business. I understand that it's not supposed to be kind of dependent on just one source of funding, which might be a grant or a philanthropy, because when that tap closes, you don't have anywhere else to go, and business falls flat on its face. Having said that, corporates have always been kind to come on board, supporting programs. Uh, we have done a few programs which are sponsored or partnered by corporates, and they write us a small check. But that's pretty much the sources of financing for us for now. We tend to stay away from taking fees from startups because, one, it ends up becoming cumbersome. The second one is, if the startup is early stage one, they anyways have limited resources, and why would you want to charge fees from startups? So for me, I mean, it comes to me at a personal level that I don't agree to that. So that's my problem. But having said that, anyone who is running an incubator or accelerator out there should always think of financial sustainability of running such a program, because if someone is giving you land and building for free, or someone is giving you a big check to run an accelerator for 5 years, and you're not going to be thinking about revenue, it is not a business. You need to think of running an incubator, accelerator, or if you're an ESO, entrepreneurship support organization, you need to think of revenues as well. And there are multiple ways in which one can build their revenue books, and that's how businesses become sustainable, and that's when they become scalable.
Amazing. That's really amazing in terms of the approach and your thoughts around supporting the startup. So ideally now, if you run a program, do startups that participate in the program, let's say it's a corporate backed program, do they get grants for going through the program?
Sure. Yeah, even in our programs, I mean, the ones that we have run, whether it is a East Africa FinTech Bootcamp or a Vaso Challenge and so on and so forth, every program we try and bring in a sponsor or a partner. That is one. So that end of the program, we write a small check of 10,000 US dollars as a grant. But also every startup that gets into any of our accelerator program, and so far we have built a portfolio of about 107 startups from across the continent of Africa, and these 107 have been selected through more than 1,800 applications. So we have seen a fair amount of early stage tech ventures in the continent, right? So I mean, if you look at the corporate programs, like the one we ran for AB InBev, there definitely was a cash grant at the end of it. But
Okay.
also every program, like I was saying, right? There's $500,000 in technology credits that we provide. So we have about 25 technology partners, including the Microsofts, the IBM, and the AWSs of the world when it comes to cloud infrastructure. But then also, if you look at accounting, payroll, if you look at design, if you look at payment gateways, and other kind of CRMs and those kind of areas, we have assembled a network of about 25 partners. And $500,000 in technology credits is fairly good, because as an early stage company, you're probably going to be spending on these services. And even if it is small fees every month, it kind of all adds up at the end of the year. So by
Absolutely.
providing the $500,000 in credits, we are able to kind of increase the runway for many startups. And if they're bootstrapped, it's all the more good for them that they're able to kind of get more done with less.
Absolutely. That's a great model. So I mean, the importance of PECs for startups cannot be overemphasized. I mean, if you
Yeah.
even think you have the money, I mean, you can still save a lot of money and definitely increase your run rate. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, AJ, for sharing that. All right. So, I mean, part of what is happening in recent time, I mean, 2021 was like one of like the biggest year for startups in Africa.
Mhm.
Raised over 4 billion US dollars in investment. I mean, there's been growth, there's been interest in that space. There's a lot of interest. What do you think about the trends and comparing that to startups globally in the US right now, laying off staffs, and there's this VC memo that startups should just slow down. What are your thoughts on what is just happening in terms of like Africa, growth in investment and the impact of the stock market crash affecting, global tech startups across the world?
So the memo that has been doing the rounds, I think that memo has been published and republished several times by several people,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't get too swayed by it. I think it makes for good content, for good reading and whatnot. But I think anyone who was not paying attention to those things, even without reading the memo, was probably either not really in his or her right senses, or probably was not cut out to run a business. I think it's plain business fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
You always need to be kind of, as a founder, or as an entrepreneur, or even as someone who is an early employee in a startup, I think it's very important that you always keep your heads down. It's always day zero, day one, and you just kind of keep trying to push forward, and uh, and just keep building your business. There's always going to be a lot of sound, whether it's around the funding winter, or certain kind of thesis that investors don't support, and whatnot. But if that is going to deter you from building a company, then you may as well better go and find a job for yourself somewhere else. So that's what, or that's how I see it. When it comes to Africa as a continent, and what we have seen, whether it is fintech, health tech, ed tech, supply chain and logistics, retail, massive opportunity. It's phenomenal. I mean, in terms of what opportunities exist, but also in terms of the kind of companies that we have been seeing. I think we got to kind of be there to actually believe it. There's a lot of people doing some fantastic stuff. The only challenge is that, again, going back to the funding numbers that you spoke about, whether it is $4 billion or $5 billion, which gets published in different sources, when you look at the actual way in which that money has been disbursed, if you have like $5 billion disbursed, and almost kind of 80% of that went to 14 companies, which
Hmm.
already have
Okay.
significant rounds of funding, you have like a really heavy bottom. So it's almost like I mean, I know that the 80-20 principle kind of applies to a lot of things,
Yeah.
but when you have almost 80% of the funding going to 14 companies, and if the total number of startups funded in Africa are close to 1,000 or
Hmm.
probably more, you can just do the math, right? I mean, you have 80% going to 14%, and 20% probably going to uh, a few hundred startups, right? So which is kind of really skewed. One of the challenges that a lot of and this is a conversation that we keep having, if you look at other ecosystems, and that's why I do not like to compare ecosystems, whether it is North America, Europe, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, they're all different. Everyone has their own peculiarities.
Hmm.
Now, if you look at India, for example, India has a very strong, just like many countries in Africa. If you look at Nigeria, if you look at Kenya, if you look at South Africa, everyone has a strong diaspora. Nigeria, for example, has a very strong diaspora
Yeah.
outside of the country. Now, also, if you look at India, China, and Nigeria as a specific example, if you look at people who go to study abroad into international universities, China, India, and Nigeria are known to be the biggest contributors or exporters of students, right, to universities abroad. Now, okay, Nigeria is about 200 million, India is 1.3 billion, China is probably 1.3 billion. It makes a huge difference when diaspora links back to the home. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the Flutter Waves, the Andelas, the Moves, I know it's all common founders, but if you look at some of the larger companies in Nigeria which have raised money, the good thing has been, or the common factor has been, the founders have been educated in the US. They have a strong social circle or network over there, which unfortunately many other startups in many other parts of Africa may not really have as a pure network, and it makes a huge difference. These are things which cannot kind of change overnight. It is very systemic. It takes a lot of time for these things to actually happen, because the peer network and the kind of ecosystem that you have when you go and study in a university overseas in America, or somewhere in Europe, or wherever, I think that plays a huge role in your ability to attract capital.
Yeah.
Look at the first wave of tech entrepreneurship. This is the first wave of tech entrepreneurship in Africa, and probably it's going to take another 5 to 10 years. Sorry, for a few companies to make exits, and exits may not always be IPOs and whatnot. I mean, yes, there are some companies which get built as legacy, but there are some companies which get built for a quick acquisition.
Yeah.
So so it's going to take another 3 to 5 years to actually have a lot of African entrepreneurs to see money for the first time.
Mhm.
And India faced the same problem. The difference with India again is that India as a country, Africa as a continent, a lot of people study overseas, they come back to India as a country, but when they come back to Africa, they go to multiple countries.
Mhm.
So even if there are 1,000 people or 2,000 people coming back from their education in America back to Africa, they're not going to one country, they're going to 50 countries. So then it automatically breaks down into smaller numbers going into smaller pockets. So it's difficult to see impact as fast as you would have seen in markets like India or China. But I think, believe me, next 3 to 5 years, a lot of things will change, and you'll see more entrepreneurs doing well, more entrepreneurs being able to attract more capital, and definitely a good number of exits happening in the next 3 to 5 years in Africa.
Absolutely. I mean, that's. I mean, I like the way you're actually able to, analyze the funding breakdown. I mean, using the 80/20. I mean, if you look deeply about this fund, I mean, you have very few, startups, raising majority of the cash, and even in Lagos, for
Mhm.
example, there are thousands of startups, and how many of those startups are really raising money? So, I mean, there is a lot that still has to be done. I mean, we still have a lot of work to do, but this growth is encouraging. Anyway, thank you very much, AJ, for sharing that. Yeah, so as we round up, is there any other thing you'd like to share with us?
I think, if I'm talking to, or if there are entrepreneurs kind of tuning in and listening to us speak, I think, keep building, because that's the most important thing.
Mm.
Because a lot of times, and just a couple of days back, I was speaking at an event which we had hosted in Nairobi, and it kind of just something that came to my mind. When you look at a game of soccer, game of football, it's 90 minutes, everyone knows that, and probably in the first 89 minutes and 30 seconds there is no goal scored and both teams are nil nil. The magic happens in the last 30 seconds, sometimes in the last 10 seconds. But if you're not attentive, in the last 10-15 seconds, the opposition might score a goal, and all the hard work that you've done defending the opponent kind of goes waste. So
Mm.
entrepreneurship and building startups is very much similar. I think you might do a lot of hard work, and you might persevere. You might not see results coming in the first 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, whatever. But you may have just kind of drilled the wall, the glass wall, iron wall, whatever and it would have just about given up. When instead you would have given up, saying that, hey, I spent 18 months doing this, I'm not seeing the results. So always persevere. You should believe in the process. Keep doing what you're doing. As long as you have validation for the idea, as long as you believe there is a buyer for what you're building, it's important to keep plugging away. Sometimes it takes time for people to come around. So if you're an entrepreneur listening, tuning into this, I think it's important that, if you've already taken the risk of going the entrepreneur way, just persevere and ensure that you put in all the hard work and the results will come your way. Funding is not the only thing. It's very important to have the business basics in place, have a business model, try and identify what are the sources of making money or generating revenue or income, and it's kind of what will pay you at the end of the day.
You, AJ, for sharing that. I think that's some amazing knowledge for the startup fund. It's really been amazing having you on the show. AJ, thank you for taking the time to join us on Curiosity Podcast.
And thank you, Kolapo. Thank you so much for having on this show. Wonderful chatting with you, and look forward to tuning into your channel and listening some other speakers and other guests that you have to hear their stories as well, because it's wonderful what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And hit me up when you're in Lagos. It will be great for us to connect, AJ. Thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and see you next time. Bye bye.